The views expressed on this show by guests and the host on issues outside of the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence are the opinions of those individuals alone and do not necessarily reflect those of architects and engineers from 9/11 Truth.
Welcome to 9/11 Freefall. I'm the host, Andy Steele. Tonight we're joined by Ted Walter, and Ted is the Director of Strategy here at AE911Truth. He's also the lead author of a little book called Beyond Misinformation, What Science Says About the Destruction of World Trade Center Buildings 1, 2, and 7. You can see mine's all dented and dog-eared because I reference this book so much. It's such just a concise summary of the World Trade Center evidence. He's also the author of our 2016 publication, which is called World Trade Center Physics, and I don't have a copy of that here at my desk. That's also a very good read. And most recently, he's authored the AE911Truth, the request for correction to the NIST report on World Trade Center Building 7, which we're going to be talking about a little bit more tonight. That was submitted back in April of 2020, and we are still fighting that battle out, and we are not done. We are going to be challenging them in the system of law, the court system. But without any further ado, let's welcome our guest here. This is Ted, and Ted, welcome to 9/11 Freefall.
Thanks, Andy. It's always good to be on.
So we're going to be planning a lot of new things here in the new year. One of them is the program that you are watching right now. We're doing a little test balloon with this. Because honestly, I've wanted to do the video format ever since the anniversary. I used to be a little intimidated by the just the scope of it, or what I perceived as the scope of it. But then when I did the anniversary event, I was like, yeah, this is actually pretty easy. So we're going to try this out sometime. So let's see how it goes tonight. Still working on the lighting situation too. It's a work in progress. But Ted is here tonight because there's been a lot going on in the world of 9/11 Truth, particularly with AE911Truth, and there's going to be a lot more going on this year because we are moving forward and doing what needs to be done to get justice for the families. They are the most important, and they're the people that we do this work for. So, Ted, let's get started with the area that I find to be the most impactful, the most interesting personally, and what I'm really following here. This is the inquest going on in the UK. Also, the NIST lawsuit, the legal stuff. It's so important, and it's, I think, how we're going to get justice if we don't get it through the Congress. But first, remind our audience what the inquest is about. We'll start with that. There may be newbies coming onto the program for the first time, just catching up with all of our great work. Please tell them what you've been doing in the UK this year.
Sure. So, AE911Truth for the last couple of years has been working with a family from the United Kingdom. It's the family of Geoff Campbell. Geoff died in the World Trade Center in the North Tower on September 11th, 2001. He was on the 106th floor at a Risk Waters conference when the tower was struck. And of course, we all know the building came down a little more than an hour and 45 minutes later. Geoff's family since then, has been struggling and, wanting to get the truth about how he died. In particular, his brother, Matt, who many people in the 9/11 Truth movement are familiar with at this point, has sort of spearheaded his family's efforts over the years, and specifically with this attempt to get a new inquest into Geoff's death. So an inquest was finally held for Geoff, along with about like 10 or 11 other British 9/11 victims in 2013. And the inquest was, it was fairly cursory kind of summary of kind of the official story and what was, brought to the coroner. First of all, if you not familiar with what an inquest is, It's a procedure that happens in the UK. I'm sure it happens in other places as well, but it's a legal procedure that happens after a death happens, sort of in unusual circumstances, where the coroner there then is just trying to establish the cause of death, like sort of the proximate cause of death, and not necessarily who killed this person, but how did this person die. And so the official, the finding in the 2013 inquest was that Geoff, along with the other British 9/11 victims, died in the collapse of the North Tower that was brought about by the tower being struck at 8:46 a.m. that day. And so, after a couple of years, Matt, his brother, started pushing to get a new investigation, and thought, knew that there was a way in British law to try to get a new inquest to take place if the family feels that the original inquest was incorrect in its conclusions. And the fortunate thing, as I met Matt in 2018, early 2018, and we started talking throughout that year. He came over to the U.S. for the 9/11 anniversary in 2018, and was at the U.S. Capitol with us that year. But that around that time, we started talking about trying to open the new inquest. He was working at it before, but I said, look, this is something that really warrants AE911Truth's help. This is a real opportunity to get a new investigation. And so we started working on it slowly. We were kind of waiting for a while, thinking that the British government might change, that if there was a change in government, that the conditions would be more favorable. And so we were kind of being patient for a while in terms of trying to start the process to get the new inquest. Once it became clear that the British government was going to change and that the Tories were going to stay in power, and Boris Johnson was, made the prime minister, we said, all right, well, let's not wait any longer. Let's go for it. So in the middle of 2020, or early to middle of 2020, we started working and looking for a barrister to represent Matt's family. And, things really got going much faster at that point. We had started earlier doing some research and developing the case, but things really started getting going when we talked to a barrister. I'm giving you the long story here, so I hope it's entertaining enough. But I haven't told the story in this much detail very many times. So, so in 2020, we started working with a barrister named Nick Stanage with Doughty Street Chambers, who took on the case. Matt had spoken with him 5 years prior to that, and he was open to it, but it never really got going, largely because Matt wasn't able to raise the funds needed at that time to start, to hire Nick Stanage. But we knew that he was open to it. And when Nick took a look at the evidence that AE911Truth had assembled and others had assembled over the years, he was actually blown away by the breadth and the strength of the evidence. He was almost shocked because he's not a very judgmental guy, but you hear about 9/11 Truth and you think like, oh, that's a far-fetched theory, or that, who knows how much evidence they really have. He was kind of blown away by the amount of evidence and how compelling it was. And, agreed to take on the case if we could, raise the funds needed to hire him. And we had some funds at the time that we used to get him to get started in a preliminary way, then raise more funds around close to the 9/11 anniversary in 2020. So we got going, and that's sort of the backstory, the first phase of it. And it ended up taking a lot longer than we expected to put together the application for the new inquest. It's essentially, to get a new inquest in the UK, you have to essentially just show. There's a few different ways that you can approach it, things that you have to demonstrate. The most basic one is that not all the evidence was presented at the first inquest. And if you have new evidence, doesn't have to be like it didn't exist before, but just if you have evidence that was not presented at the first inquest that could change the original verdict, then you're entitled to have a new inquest. And you approach the Attorney General first, which is pretty much the equivalent to our Attorney General in the United States. You approach the Attorney General first for their authority, and then they grant their authority for you to apply to the High Court. And then you apply to the High Court for an order quashing the original inquest and granting a new one. And so that's the process that we're involved in right now. And it's, I can't emphasize enough that it's a very low threshold to that you have to demonstrate, that it's not the job of the attorney general to look at the evidence and decide, does this evidence decisively change the verdict of the original inquest? The attorney general's job is really to look at the evidence and more like take it at face value. Like, if this evidence has does do what the applicants say it does, if we take it at face value, could it change the original verdict? And if there's any chance that the original verdict could change, just a reasonable chance, then that the new inquest is supposed to be granted. And so, this is basically a slam dunk situation. There have been many legal efforts in the past, 2 decades related to 9/11 and the 9/11 Truth movement, where maybe we were throwing a Hail Mary, or it was a long shot, or things really had to go our way. In this case, we have a situation where, like, the law is completely tailored to our goal, because it's supposed to be easy for families to get a new inquest if they believe that the findings of the original inquest were at fault. You don't want to make it hard for families to feel that they have the truth about how their loved ones died. So the law is designed to make it easy for families to get the new inquest. So we spent the past year putting together the application. I was primarily me working closely with Nick Stanage and Matt Campbell, although other people helped out a little bit here and there along the way. And one of the things that we did that was brand new was we went and found eyewitnesses, who, people who in the past have given their account of what they witnessed, whether it's in the FDNY oral histories or the Port Authority police reports or other sources, on sometimes in TV and film. And we went and found those people, and we approached many people to ask them to, if they would testify if there were a new inquest held. And we found 5 people willing to give their account again and to testify at a new inquest. And so the application that we finally submitted this past August, a couple of weeks before the 20th anniversary, it's roughly 2,500 pages of evidence. Some of those are the statements of these eyewitnesses, basically retelling their stories, referencing their original documentation related to their stories, and saying that they would come and testify at the new inquest. We also have 6 expert witnesses who gave testimony as part of the application, and who are ready to testify. I won't say if, I'll say when the new inquest happens, within the next year or two. And so, yeah, many people, the story that I'm telling will be familiar to a lot of people, especially now if they have seen the film, The Unspeakable, which we're probably going to talk about in a little bit, which features Matt and his brother, and his mother, Maureen, but also Matt's father and the fiance, the ex-fiance, the surviving fiance of Geoff, is also a party to the application. And I think that again, just because it's so viable, and it's really like a perfect situation for us. Everybody knows that Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth focuses only on the evidence of controlled demolition. This is a situation, like a legal, situation where the only thing that we're trying to demonstrate is that the buildings were brought down by controlled demolition, and specifically the North Tower where Geoff was. All that this, that the Campbell family is trying to do right now, as far as this inquest is concerned, is demonstrate that fact. And so, we are very well suited to be assisting the Campbell family in that, in that case, in that effort. We submitted that in mid to late, it was August 26th. So we expected to hear back within 6 months of when we submitted. So that would be early this year, perhaps in February. Could happen any day, could happen 6 months from now. We don't know exactly when the Attorney General will respond. I don't imagine it'll happen more than a year from when we first submitted. I'm just like you, Andy. I'm thrilled about this. I think this is only because it is, the chances of prevailing are so good. And if we don't, if the Attorney General says no, I mean, it will be a total miscarriage of justice, and we will appeal that decision to the high court if the attorney general says no. But really, there's no reason why they should say no unless politics gets in the way. But we're pretty confident that it won't. And to be able to, above all else, it's just the opportunity to work with the Campbell family, and to know that we're at least helping this one family, although we expect many other families to learn about this and be affected by it and want action taken afterwards. It's been an honor and a privilege for me and for everyone at AE911Truth to work with Matt and his family to bring truth and justice for Matt's brother, Geoff.
That's right. And I have a quote here that I took you took it, but brought my attention to it, and it's from the Unspeakable, which we'll be talking about. But it says, it's from Ian Henshaw. One of the most important things that happened to the 9/11 Truth movement was that Matt Campbell turned up, and he's really showing some serious leadership skills and raising the call for a need for a new inquest for his brother. And what's interesting is that this has actually gotten attention in the UK. When I was helping you out trying to find photographers to take a picture of Matt's mom for the billboard that we just did, the lady had actually heard about this issue, not just about the controlled demolition evidence, but had heard specifically about the inquest. So I take these little signs as a mark of success for AE911Truth, and of course for the Campbell family. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on. And, things that happen in court, they move very slow a lot of times. So we are moving forward with that, and we will keep everyone updated on this as new developments occur. But we've also got things going on here in the United States, because that is where 9/11 took place, right here in New York City. And we've been pursuing NIST for a very long time. Now we're really going after them with the request for correction and the lawsuit. Again, Ted, we sometimes have new people here on this show, new to the movement. Please give our audience a brief overview of what that is all about.
Yeah, so this one is a lot more, I guess you could say, technical than the inquest, which in some ways is very straightforward. A family trying to establish the truth about the cause of the death of their son. With the request for correction and the current lawsuit that's underway, this was a process that was started almost 2 years ago. It was April of 2020. As many people know, we funded a study by Professor Leroy Halsey at the University of Alaska Fairbanks that took 4 years to complete. And he finally issued the final report of that study in March of 2020, so almost 2 years ago. And we, once the results of the study started to become clear towards the end in the final year, I mean, obviously we were getting updates along the way, but once things really came into focus, we decided that we should, one of the things that should come out of this study is that we should use the findings of the study to pursue a request for correction with NIST, to NIST's final report on World Trade Center Building 7. And so we began preparing for that, I would say, in later 2020, later 2019, early months of 2020, and submitted this request for correction to NIST a few weeks after the University of Alaska Fairbanks report was issued in March of 2020. What the request for correction does is basically identify several areas in the NIST report where NIST violates its own information quality standards. NIST was required, I think, a law that was passed back in 2000 called the Information Quality Act or the Data Quality Act. Both names are used. NIST was required to establish, and all other federal agencies were required to establish information quality standards that all of their information that they issue in reports like the NIST report has to comply with. And the idea is to ensure that information issued by federal agencies is objective and unbiased and secure and all these other things. We found, I think there's more, but we focused on 8 areas of the report that we felt we could demonstrate violated their information quality standards, in particular, the standard of objectivity. that NIST's the information that NIST issued was unbiased and objective. A lot of that had to do with NIST, with the computer modeling related to Building 7, but not so much in the weeds, like, you know, ones and zeros and such. More like the story that NIST told about how the collapse initiated. Their modeling produced a story, and we could look at that story and tell that there were issues with it when you understand the actual construction, the design and construction of the building. There were things that engineers back in the early days after the final report was issued, which was in 2008. So 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, a lot of discoveries were made. And then there was a bunch of documents that were released around that time, 2011 or 2012, that gave people more of an understanding of the design of the building. And a lot of discoveries were made around that time about, how the construction of the building and how the story didn't hold up. And a lot of that then was put to the test with the computer modeling that Dr. Leroy Halsey did at UAF. And so the first, I want to say, 4 areas of the request were really focused on that initiating event that NIST says initiated the chain reaction, the series of structural failures that led to the total collapse, which from the beginning to end, from when the chain started to when the collapse began was something like about 7 seconds. It was very, very brief. Well, there's the collapse initiation, and then there's the actual 7-second collapse. And then there's an event that precedes the collapse initiation that everyone's familiar with, which is the fall of the East Penthouse. Anyway, so the request basically looks at these and says, like, I mean, I could really get into the weeds here, but basically shows how these things couldn't have happened. So like this feature that NIST omitted from its modeling, which NIST has admitted that it omitted from its modeling, if you actually include that feature in the model, the failure that NIST says happened couldn't have taken place. Basically, the idea that these beams that were pushing into this girder, and that this girder would then fall off of its seat. There's a particular structural feature on the girder called the stiffener. The girder, once it gets pushed over the edge of the beam that it's sitting on, it won't start to tip over if this, and the bottom of it won't start to bend if this feature is on it. It will just sit there leaning over the edge, but it won't actually start to bend if this stiffener is attached to it. And NIST left that stiffener off in its model. And we basically proved through the UAF modeling that if the stiffener is there, the beam won't bend, the girder won't bend, and it won't walk off of its seat, and then you won't get this set of structural failures that happened after that. That's just one example. That's the most blatant example, partly because it was something that we know that NIST just left off, and if you include it, it has this effect. There were also other areas of it where, the 5th area, I mentioned 8, the 5th area, NIST is where we really focus on the free fall. And we focus on the fact that NIST model does not reproduce any of the observed, features of the collapse. The free fall, the instantaneous initiation of free fall, also the lack of deformation in the actual collapse versus a NIST model where there's a huge amount of deformation, and one other area, the directionality of it. It comes straight down. And NIST, what's great about when you really dig into the NIST report, you can find a lot of these observations that NIST made about the actual event that contradict what's in their model. So NIST does a very good job, actually, if you look at some of their figures, of showing us that there was 0 deformation of the structure, like none. Like they even say 0.6 seconds into the initiation of collapse, the upper corners of the building had not even moved a bit. They hadn't even, they're saying that the collapse is initiated, and yet there is no deformation and no displacement of the upper corners of the building. And they make that observation. We don't make it. They do for us. So, that was one area that we focused on. And so basically NIST claims that their model reproduced the collapse. was reasonably similar to the collapse, I think was the terminology that they used. And we make the case that it's not. The last three areas have to do with evidence of explosions and incendiaries that NIST essentially omitted. And one of those is the seismic evidence of explosions, which NIST interprets the seismic signals that were emitted from the World Trade Center site at that time as being due to floors falling inside the building. We had Dr. Andre Rousseau testify as part of this process, as part of the request, that there's no way that falling floors can generate seismic waves that will travel all the way up to Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. I can't remember the exact distance, but I want to say like 30 kilometers away, and other things as well. And then in the other part of the request, we talked about all the eyewitness accounts of explosions. We looked at the story of Barry Jennings. If you dig into the NIST report, you see that NIST claims that it took Barry Jennings, the eyewitness, and who witnessed the explosion that morning that many people are familiar with, and the person who was with him, Michael Hess, who was the corporate counsel of New York City, so the head lawyer, that it took them 28 minutes to descend 17 floors. That's about 1 minute and 40 seconds per floor. It would take you, if you're running down the stairs, it would take you, 5 or 10 seconds to get one flight of stairs, which is what Barry Jennings said in his story, that they were basically hopping landings. So there's no way that but in this story, that's what they say, that it took Barry Jennings and Michael Hess that long, 28 minutes to descend 17 stories in order for NIST's story to make sense. And so NIST is trying to dismiss the idea that what they witnessed was an explosion by saying that what they witnessed at 10:28 was just the collapse of the North Tower and the debris hitting the building. In reality, what they witnessed occurred much earlier than 10:28. So there's a lot of detail in the request. Oh, the last one is the sulfidation of steel that NIST never investigated, never did any tests or anything that was documented in the FEMA report, as many people are aware. So it was a long document, 100 pages that I drafted myself, but with the help of many people, about a dozen experts, as well as Mick Harrison, the attorney who is the executive director of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. And that started a whole process where we were hoping that somebody at NIST would do the right thing and actually amend their report to address the issues identified in our request for correction. And not that we were expecting them to, we were hoping that they would. They came back a little more than 4 months later with denying an initial denial of our request for correction. We appealed that a month later. This was in September of 2020. We added some evidence in December of 2020, actually, a new eyewitness an eyewitness account that we discovered and I tracked down this eyewitness. She was a news person, a news anchor, not an anchor, but a reporter for New York One. Her name was Annika Pergament. No, that was who we thought it was. It's been a long time. It was, I want to say Stonewood. Gigi Stonewood was her name. She reported that day a very loud explosion when Building 7 came down. She said that on TV. We only found it like a day after we submitted our appeal. Somebody brought it to our attention. So we submitted that evidence in December, and then we actually tracked her down. I tracked her down, and she repeated her story via email to me, that it was a loud explosion. And so we submitted that to NIST, and we said, if you're going to really do a proper investigation of this, you need to contact her and interview her. When NIST came back with their final decision in July of this past year, and I apologize for all the detail, but I assume if people are listening, they want to hear, all the juicy details of this story. When NIST came back to us with a final decision in July, they basically said that evidence that we submitted in December didn't count because it wasn't submitted along with when we submitted the appeal in September. But they said even if it did count, our rationale here still holds. They didn't really have a rationale for, I mean, if you go and read their response, their initial response, and then their final decision, it's mind-blowing how empty they are and how unresponsive they are, and how, I mean, as far as the Barry Jennings thing that I mentioned, we're asking this for a basic explanation. How did it take Barry Jennings 28 minutes to descend 17 floors? And they wrote one sentence in their response that said, we interviewed around a dozen people who were around, in the building or whatever. Our story is based on the accounts of 8 different people or whatever. That was it. They just made that sort of very generic, basic statement. Nothing about, well, this is what happened to Mr. Jennings here, and this is blah, 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 and da, 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 and you misinterpreted this, and like nothing. It's just, we interviewed a lot of people. That's our story. That doesn't explain how it takes Barry Jennings, 28 minutes to descend 17 floors. So that was the kind of response that we got throughout the whole, through their initial decision and then their final decision. The final decision was even more generic than and boilerplate than their original, their initial decision, where they kind of did the meat of their fluffy like nothingness. And in the final decision, they basically just said, we use a different modeling program than you guys used, so your findings don't have any connection to ours. Essentially, don't have any relationship, don't have any relevance to ours. That was the only statement of substance in their final decision. So we finally, we decided that as we were anticipating we decided to sue NIST for violating the Data Quality Act, because we believe that the response to our request for correction is illegal. It's basically gibberish. It's basically like engineering gibberish. It's like nonsense what they put in their decisions. And that violates the Information Quality Act, which is supposed to be a tool for the public to ensure that agencies issue information that's correct and unbiased. And if agencies essentially don't have to respond in a meaningful way to a request for correction, then the Information Quality Act has no value. It's, at best, it can help agencies if they make a small mistake. Agencies can be like, oh yeah, you're right, we made a mistake there. But if you're actually trying to challenge an agency on the validity or the correctness or of the information that they issue, the Data Quality Act, it means nothing, because how likely is an agency going to be to change something, if they're not held accountable for, in a court of law. And so that's what they're trying to argue now. They're trying to argue that the Data Quality Act, we sued them in September. They just responded to our complaint last week, December 23rd, and are arguing that the Data Quality Act, doesn't, it's basically can't be enforced in a court of law. That it's not subject to judicial review, the actions that agencies take under the Data Quality Act. So there's no accountability if that's the case, and we're arguing that that's not the case. And if we prevail, which we think we have a realistic shot, even though the courts can be very deferential to federal agencies. We think that the best, the ideal scenario here is that we get NIST to that we get the court, get the judge to order NIST to go back, and at a minimum, let's try running that model with the stiffener included and see what happens. NIST's explanation for not including the stiffener is, if you want to know it, I can tell it to you, but I'm actually going to be writing a series of articles in the coming month or so that is really unpacking everything that is in the request for correction and how it goes further than we've ever gone before, in terms of exposing the fraud in the NIST report, in large part because of the answers that NIST gives us or doesn't give us. We go much further than ever before in exposing their fraud. And so that's what we're involved in right now, fighting this legal battle. But the goal is to get NIST to go back and have to actually run the analysis with the stiffener to actually test the steel the steel that underwent sulfidation and intergranular melting, and many of these other things. And yeah, we're hopeful. We're not the only plaintiff in the case. We're also joined by eight 9/11 family members, and by 10 architects and structural engineers. So there's three different classes of plaintiffs. If they, because one of the things that NIST is trying to do is say that the different classes of plaintiffs don't have standing, and so we're, maybe one of the classes of plaintiffs will get pulled away. The court will find that, like, oh, the architects and structural engineers don't have standing in this case because they weren't injured by NIST's actions. So that's why we have so many different groups of plaintiffs. But yeah, we're doing our best, and we just raised funds to go forward with the next phase of the lawsuit. So thank you very much to everybody who donated. It's incredibly generous, and you are making a big difference with your gift. Even if things don't pan out our way, going through this process is very important for exposing the fraud of the NIST report, because the more of a paper trail there is, the more likely it is that people will pick this up and do something with it in the future, and hopefully in the near future.
Well, that is a pretty good summation of the entire thing. And they must hate getting mail from you, Ted. I mean, seeing your name on that envelope, they probably gives them a headache. They got to go into the drawer and get their Advil out. But no, it's really great work. And honestly, I know you spearheaded a lot of this stuff going on. And just really quick, before we move on to the next thing, what can we expect next in this? And is this the first time that it's going to be argued in court?
So the next step is we're probably going to file an amended petition or an amended complaint in the next few weeks. I think January 13th is the deadline. Basically, when they respond with their motion to dismiss, which they did last week, it gives us a chance to see what their strategy is for trying to get our case dismissed, and we can do things to our complaint to beef it up a little bit so that it's harder to get it dismissed. So that's the next step. Then they're going to they might amend their response to our complaint, and then in February we will submit our actual full response to their motion to dismiss, and then we'll wait and see what the court says. Hopefully within a few months the court will respond and decide whether or not we have standing, whether or not the case can proceed to the next phase, which would be not focused on the procedural stuff but focused on the substance. So things will just keep an eye out. It'll be the next couple months that things will really start happening with that a lot faster. What was your other question, Andy? Whether this is the first time? This has been litigated in the past. The Data Quality Act and the case law is mixed on whether whether actions like this can be brought under the Data Quality Act. In some cases, the plaintiffs have done better than others. So in terms of, the NIST Building 7 report itself has never really faced any legal challenge to its validity that had any sort of legal weight or was in a legal arena. There was a request for correction done back in 2007 regarding the Twin Towers, which was spearheaded by the James Gorley, who's an attorney, and was signed on to by folks like Stephen Jones and Kevin Ryan, Richard Gage, also at that point, signed on, as well as two family members, Bob McIlvaine and Bill Doyle. But that case met a fate where, NIST responded. They went through the same process, got the initial response, then got the final decision. No, you know what? I'm going to change that. I don't think that they ever got a final decision from NIST. I was conferring with James Gorley on that last year. And that's interesting that NIST never responded to their what you want to call it, their appeal. And a long time has passed, but it's, I don't know, it's something that potentially could be litigated that NIST never responded, because that really is truly a violation of the Data Quality Act, just not issuing a final decision. So, so I think that's a multi-tiered answer to your second question.
All right, well, we've got a lot to talk about here, and we plan to go the hour, but who knows if we'll keep to it here. But let's move on to something I have talked about a lot on the podcast, which is the Unspeakable, and we've also got a book coming out. These are educational and somewhat entertaining outreach materials. But Ted, you talk about it so much better, so please take the floor.
Well, sure. Yeah, I mean, this past year was, we really had two big focuses this past year. One was these two legal initiatives that were underway already, that came to fruition in August and September of this year, and now are continuing to unfold. The other was on ways to raise public awareness and sort of capture the public's attention around the 20th anniversary. And one of them, which you mentioned, is the Unspeakable. It's the documentary film that we produced, our first feature-length documentary since 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out, and which was, I sometimes I get this wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was 2012. And then the other thing you mentioned was Born 9/11, which is the incredible graphic novel that you have created over the last 4 years, which I'm going to let maybe you talk about it a little bit too. And I think you do talk about it better than me. Yeah, so with the film, I mean, there's a lot of backstory to the film and how it evolved. But early, late spring, early summer, we started on this concept. There was another thing that we tried that didn't work out, but it may in the future. But so we got started on this concept in, pretty late in the game. But we knew, because we had been working with these families for so many years, that we could pull this together quickly, and that this was a story that needed to be told around the 20th anniversary. Kelly David, who's our chief operating officer, has developed quite a strong collaborative relationship with Dylan Avery, who's the creator of Loose Change, as most people are familiar with. Dylan, we basically pitched Dylan on making a film about, largely focused on the 9/11 families that we have been working with for the past several years, and telling their story around the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and going in a much deeper level, kind of emotionally, and kind of the arc of their journey over the last 20 years than anything that AE911Truth had done, and sort of merging that with, their ongoing efforts to try to get the truth out, and get, what we know, to get that out, and to get the full truth discovered. And so it was really kicked off in late May, early June, interviewing the family, the McIlvaine family. So Bob and Helen McIlvaine, the Campbell family, Matt Campbell, his mother Maureen, his brother, and then the family of Drew De Palma. Drew is a younger 9/11 family member who first signed our petition back in December of 2017. He lost his mother Jean that day, who also worked in the North Tower. We also were fortunate to be able to interview his aunt, Francine. And then finally, the family of Bill Brinier. Bill is an architect from New York. Now he lives up in the Hudson Valley. He lost his best friend, Frank DiMartini, in the World Trade Center. Frank was the World Trade Center construction manager, and was responsible for rescuing dozens of people in the North Tower, getting them out of the upper floors of the North Tower before it came down. Bill and Frank have been like best friends since they were in college together at Pratt. Maybe before that, I'm not sure on that detail, but I think at Pratt, anyway, they went to Pratt together and were very, very close ever since then, like family basically. So their kids, like Bill's daughter, like thinks of Frank as an uncle basically. Anyway, so Bill's story really fit into this film as well. I think at this point, many people have watched it, so I'm going to spare a sort of synopsis of it, which I was maybe at risk of getting into. But you can find it very easily if you go to our website, or if you Google the Unspeakable, it'll pop up right at the top, which is a change for us, because one of the issues that we've dealt with in terms of our efforts to raise awareness and the films and the videos that we've released is that our YouTube channel is essentially, hidden from, you cannot find any video that you can put in the exact title of a film of ours and have a lot of trouble finding it through Google and through the YouTube search. So one of the great things about the release of the Unspeakable Among many things that we could talk about is that we have partnered with a film distributor called Cow Lamp Films. And they have the first step in releasing and getting this film out there was we released it on their YouTube channel on November 1st. And the film is much easier to find than any films that are released on our channel. And so that's a model that we might continue to use going forward, is looking for whether it's this distributor because we have the relationship with them already, or others, using their YouTube channels rather than ours. So far, the film seems to not have been dinged in any way, even though it's focused on 9/11 and 9/11Truth, in large part because it's on somebody else's channel. The film has done well in the first almost 2 months. I can't say it's going viral, but we're nearing 400,000 views after 2 months, and we kind of expected, because it's not like a breaking news or anything. It's a really beautifully made film that it will continue to grow and keep accumulating views, 100,000 or more per month for the foreseeable future. We'll also be releasing it on other platforms shortly. So most streaming platforms, like free, a lot of, I wouldn't say free, but several platforms that you can access through your Roku or Apple TV, your devices or whatever, not just on your computer, but in front of the TV. It'll be available on a lot of those platforms in the next month or so, and so hopefully be accumulating hundreds of thousands, if not more, views there. And I think that this film, there's a lot to say about it. Dylan and Kelly managed to make it in an incredibly short amount of time. We were pushing for the 20th anniversary. We ended up releasing it. We had a screening of it, which many people attended on the evening of September 9th. And Bob and Drew and Bill, along with another family member, Michelle Little, joined us that evening for a Q&A afterwards, which you hosted, Andy. We released that. We had that screening, but we decided to not push it. To be frank, we were interested in releasing it very shortly after the Spike Lee film came out that was supposed to feature many members of AE911Truth, which we might talk a little bit about in a bit. Once it was clear that that wasn't going to happen, we kind of took the foot off the gas and just said, let's make this, let's get it perfect and release it a little bit later if we have to. So that's what we did. We released it on November 1st. Incredible job done by everybody by Kelly, by Dylan, by everybody, the crews that they worked with in New York and in the UK, and to the families who participated and opened themselves up and told their story in a really just open, honest way. And I think that the film some people wish that it had more evidence in it, more evidence of controlled demolition. I think that there's certainly some in there, and there's some analysis, and there's some brand new evidence in the form of the appearance of Cyril Wecht, a world-renowned forensic pathologist, who many people are familiar with, because of the JFK assassination and other cases that he has weighed in on. But I think the film, as it's proving to do, is going to really get through. It's going to open people's minds and hearts in a way that a lot of the other films that we release, don't try to and aren't able to. And I think also, I think it's gonna we have a lot of battles to fight in the future where we are going to be AE911Truth is going to be targeted and accused of being conspiracy theorists and accused of being insulting or hurtful to the 9/11 families. And so this film is very important to just have there as telling our story, which was our goal for the 20th anniversary, telling the story of who we are and why we do this. And I think it does it well. So it's going to be it's going to serve a lot of good for quite a while until we're done with this thing and we get a new investigation. I could change gears to the Born 9/11. What would you like to say about it, Andy? What would you like to say about the Unspeakable or about Born 9/11?
Well, I want to say that the approach that we took in this Unspeakable is the absolute right approach for the 20th anniversary for all the reasons that you just listed. I mean, to me, the case has already been made regarding the controlled demolition of the towers. I mean, and we're going to talk about seeking new evidence and in certain research and investigations that we're doing. But to me, the case was made 10 years ago, at least for the need for a new investigation. It's the most reasonable thing that anybody can ask for. I've even had debunkers agree that rerunning the analysis is not the worst thing in the world that you could do. But what I see now is that we have a psychological problem here in the United States and in the greater world. We have cognitive dissonance to get over for a lot of people. And this is a great film for doing that, to let them know that it's okay to have questions as you feature people who lost people very close to them, very near and dear to them, who are asking the same questions that we have been, that the architects and engineers who put their name to the petition are asking, and proudly signing that petition so that we can use their credibility to go forward and lobby Congress and all these entities that have failed us, in my view. And so the other tool that we're talking about here is the graphic novel that I worked on. I've talked about this in an interview before, but this is the reason I didn't sleep for a few years, especially in the last year, trying to get it out. And right now, we were expecting this to come out around the anniversary as well, but there were some circumstances, some of them beyond our control, that's delayed the shipping. But we're told that they're coming in January, and then we're going to be talking about it a lot more. It's going to go on sale again. Right now, I have the only copy in creation here because I get an advance copy, so I have to approve it. So that's what it looks like right there. And basically, yeah, that's the book right here, the only copy that exists. Now we got some beautiful cover art by Jeff Long, and
there is a second copy.
Say something?
There is a second copy.
Oh, there is. Yeah, they sent one to the office. That's
yes.
Right. That is right. Okay.
Well,
my copy doesn't feel so special anymore now.
But it's special. We sent out.
I like it, and basically, yeah. So this is it. And here's the deal. It is my name on the cover, and, I wrote the story and did the art on the inside and everything. But we have such a great team here, and nothing is ever done as an island here at AE911Truth. And just so that I make sure I did not forget anybody, I've got a credits page right in the beginning somewhere here. Let me make sure here. So we've got great editing work by Craig McKee, who didn't just help me find my commas and apostrophes and put them right in the correct place, but would sometimes suggest a better way of stating something or tell me how a scene is going and say, well, maybe you should use this word instead of that word. So a very creative guy in his own right, Craig McKee. Kelly David, who I'd be consulting with and saying, Kelly, is this picture okay? Can I do that? Or what do you think of this? And sort of just keeping me in line so I don't get carried away here. Susan Clay, who's a great editor here at AE911Truth. And of course, our very own Ted Walter, because there's a lot of technical stuff in this too. It's an entertaining story, but there's a lot of technical information. And in my view, I'm not just saying this because my book, but I've gone on interviews and I found that the last chapter in this is actually a very good reference for what we say, what NIST says, and what we say back. So it's something that you can reference as well. And a lot of times, if I didn't know how I should portray something or whatever, I'd be calling Ted and saying, what do you think of this picture? Should I do it better or what should be different in it? So a lot of great people here at AE911Truth helped out with this. And of course, the beautiful cover art by Jeff Long, if I didn't mention it, back cover. And there's my picture too. I don't know about the hairstyle. I got a little overzealous with the hair gel, but what are you going to do? But anyway, that is going to be going on sale as soon as they come in. And please, if you have friends that are interested in entertainment, it's wrapping the controlled demolition evidence into entertainment. And I think it's a pretty good story. So do you have anything else to say on that, Ted?
Well, I was going to say the other person who has the other copy is Rosie O'Donnell, because we sent her that second copy to thank her for giving an endorsement to the book, so her endorsement is on the back, and she loves the book as well, as does pretty much everybody who's read it, all the people obviously like Michelle Little and Kamal and Kamal Obaid and Graham McQueen, whose endorsements are on the back. I was blown away by it when I read it. I mean, the number of characters that you develop and how unique and realistic all of them are, and the emotional journeys of not only Kevin, the protagonist, but his uncle and his mom, and it's just beautifully constructed story that really kind of gets the most important themes about 9/11 and the, as you mentioned, the cognitive dissonance, and but then the desire and the drive that many people feel to get the truth out, and yeah, it just wraps all the most important themes about 9/11 and 9/11 truth together with the controlled demolition evidence in a like incredibly entertaining story. So yeah, I mean, incredible work, Andy, and I hope that this book will make a big difference, and for for as long as it takes to get a new investigation, I hope the book will reach many young people. I think you and I, the age that we're at, we're starting to realize there's a lot of people who are younger than us who were little children or weren't even born yet when 9/11 happened. Who like are often the most motivated if you really get through to them, about what 9/11 was. There's a whole generation younger than us who I think when the information is presented to them in the right way are going to like take up this cause. And this book can play a part of that. So
That's right. Actually, the hero of the story is being born just as his father's getting killed in the World Trade Center. So that is what we're looking to is the future, because at some point we're going to get older. We're never going to get tired, but we're going to get older, and we're going to need some helping hands from the next generation. And I have a lot of faith in them because a lot of people are waking up to a lot of things right now in our society. And I think for them, 9/11 is going to be a no-brainer. So take a look out for our bulletins. When they come in, we'll be letting you know. So, Ted, this was a milestone year, 20 years. And I don't put a lot of emphasis on years myself, personally. But I know the TV does when it comes to anniversary events, and a very important one like September 11th. I know people think about these things. So 20 years since that happened. The world's changed a lot since then. Let's talk about some events that happened around the 20th anniversary of this year.
Sure. So I think you may be referring to the Spike Lee film, which I mentioned earlier. And I think at this point, many people listening to this, you will have read about it or heard about it, how many members of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth were going to be, as well as friends of ours, such as Bob McIlvaine and Drew DePalma, William Rodriguez, the janitor, who witnessed explosions in the basement, one of them before the first plane hit. We're going to be featured in essentially the final half hour of Spike Lee's 8-hour docuseries, and about COVID and then about 9/11. So the first half was about COVID, the second half was about 9/11. Well, I'm not going to retrace the whole story, but there was a lot of backlash to, in the media, because the media were the only folks who were allowed to watch it. But so when HBO released the series to the media, within a few days, people started writing about it. There was an interview with Spike Lee in the New York Times that basically went viral. Kind of people started, other newspapers, news outlets started quoting from it. And then, there was a very damaging hit piece that came out in Slate by Jeremy Stahl, who, an editor at Slate, who's written about Richard and about AE911Truth a couple times in the past. And that sort of touched off a situation where the whole section, the 30-minute section, ended up being cut out of the film just within a few days of that Slate article and all the sort of the uproar beginning. There's a lot to say about this. We were, because of the 20th anniversary, as you mentioned, the numbers are important in terms of, at least the stories that we tell ourselves, the story, what is going to make the media or the public interested in something. Well, the fact that it's the 20th anniversary is, and so Spike Lee was, essentially brought on board or pitched this project to HBO. and was going to tell this story on the 20th anniversary. And so it was going to be on the 20th anniversary of that day that there was going to be a half an hour of content dedicated to, the architects and engineers and family members and survivors and others telling the truth about what really happened to the towers. And then that didn't come to be. I will say that, there's a lot that I could say about it, but I will say that I wouldn't give up hope. If you really pay close attention, you can, within a couple days, when it was announced that that this half an hour was going to be removed, there was no announcement from Spike Lee. It was a very one sentence announcement from HBO, and Spike Lee has not said anything publicly about the half hour being removed or about 9/11 Truth or his beliefs about what really happened to the towers since all this happened. And I doubt that this is the last that we're going to hear from Spike Lee about 9/11 and about what really happened that day. Yeah, I mean, I think it isn't, well, I don't want to go too much into that, there's a lot, I don't want to speculate is what I'm trying to say about why did Spike remove the half hour? Was he forced to, or did he feel, that he feel embarrassed by what was revealed about, Richard, which was, Richard made some statements about COVID and about things related to COVID, that Jeremy Stahl in the Slate article went and found and published in that hit piece. I think it's safe to say, and I think Richard would even agree with this, that it played a big part in the half hour being removed. I think my sense, and I did have conversations with Spike Lee after that piece came out, was that it was very hard for Spike to, at that point, fight. He really didn't seem to mind at all of this stuff that was coming out, people just kind of attacking him generically about it. But when that piece about Richard came out, it kind of changed everything. And suddenly Spike felt he couldn't vouch for what Richard was saying. And, and it was much harder for him to fight to keep that half an hour in the piece, at least as it was edited, with Richard being such a big part of it. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but I think it's not the end of this story. Anyway, I hope it's not. And I'm fairly optimistic that it's not. And this is one of the things, we are working on many, many fronts to raise awareness and to legally and whatnot. But this kind of flash and of, this huge exposure from something like a Spike Lee documentary is exactly what the movement needs to bring this to the next level and sort of to have as a turning point. And I do believe that some sort of turning point like this is going to happen, whether it's because of the Campbell inquest or, something more related to film and television. I do think that something big is going to happen soon. And it's going to sort of divide the first 20 years of the movement, of the history of the movement. It's from kind of what happens next, kind of a before and after moment, I hope. I don't think that's the only way that 9/11 Truth can ultimately succeed, but I think that's the surest way. The most, is that there's something big will happen that will change the game. So yeah, that unfortunate missed opportunity, but I think that similar opportunities will come in the future.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, because guess what? We're still here. We're still doing the work that we are doing, moving forward. Ted with the legal efforts. Kelly and Dylan just made an excellent film, and all of our lobbying and everything that we do is still going. And we've got an excellent CEO. His name is Roland Engel. And Ted, I'm going to let you take the floor. Tell us more about Roland.
Sure. Well, yeah, Roland was appointed, first as acting CEO and then permanent CEO after Richard left. It was really, I just want to say, take a moment here without glossing over it, that not that you were going to do that, not that you were trying to do that, Andy, but, that Richard, founded this organization and was the head of the organization for 15 years. And what he did for the cause of 9/11 Truth is immeasurable. And everyone at the organization, and I think, countless tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, maybe even millions, are grateful to Richard for founding this organization and keeping it going for as long as he did. I think there's few people in this movement or in history who have the energy and the drive that Richard has, and the amount of energy that he put into getting this organization going is an incredibly heavy lift that most people just wouldn't have the passion or the hope to do. So we're all grateful to Richard. And I think that, when things came to pass in August and September, I think that the bottom line is that, he, because of the statements that he made, that, as I said before, we're going to have to fight a lot of battles in the future in the public eye. And we need somebody who, we need a leader, and we need a whole group of leaders who are laser focused on 9/11. And anything that we say that is unrelated to 9/11 will be magnified and used to undermine our message. And as much as Richard was fantastic at delivering the message and explaining to people how the buildings were brought down by controlled demolition, he did it so well to reach thousands of people. Going forward, those statements made it impossible for him to represent 3,500 architects and engineers who have all sorts of views, but they've come together to make this statement about 9/11. And so that was, as my understanding anyway, is the thinking of the board of directors. So Roland is someone who is laser focused on 9/11. He signed AE911Truth's petition in 2007, and he joined the board of directors, and he was an expert speak out, 9/11 explosive expert speak out, and then he joined the board of directors in 2016, and got very active in terms of organizing and training other engineers to give presentations around the world. Most of them are in the U.S., but there's some that are overseas as well. Give presentations about the World Trade Center evidence. It's called Project Due Diligence, which some of you out there, our supporters, will know about. And so he has an active team of a few dozen engineers who are giving presentations. It has been slowed down by COVID. It's been made it's harder to go out and give these presentations. They're not happening as often, but we've been kind of switching over to virtual, and there have been several virtual presentations. And we'll be continuing to work at this in the coming year. But he's a civil engineer. I didn't mention that. Who's had a 50-year career in civil engineering. Yeah, he's a wonderful guy to work with as well. I think when you hear him speak about the evidence, it's very, he has a very compelling way about him. He's very, articulate discussing the evidence, and there's a conviction about him as well that I think is very powerful. So yeah, I look forward to, Roland, he's been doing it for the last few months, but continuing to do what he's already been doing for the last several years, and being a leader for this organization, at a difficult time as we, navigate what this organization looks like without Richard. But much of what the organization does, because there are many, there's several staff members and many volunteers, has not changed and has kept going as it did before Richard left. Roland is an excellent spokesperson. Roland he's also working hard to develop other people who are going to be good spokespeople, and the future of AE911Truth forever, however long AE911Truth has to remain alive in order to get the new investigation to happen and ensure that it's done well. And I think that's an important thing to remember, going back to the Richard question, is, organizations, often that was a moment where, I think the board and the organization had to decide, given the consequences of Richard's actions, and that we think he's, not going to be able to represent 3,500 architects and engineers anymore, without being undermined by the media and others. Is this going to stay an organization that is kind of led by one person and all about one person? Not that Richard is, he always would give credit to other people for sure, but or is this going to be an organization that is going to, be about many more people and be about, the kind of expanding the leadership and expanding, is the organization going to be bigger, than the person? And, I think everyone thought that the organization needed to evolve now. So that's my understanding anyway. That's my take, speaking for myself, from my vantage point. But again, I am also personally grateful to Richard for bringing me on board, working with me in the early days. I first met him in 2007, when I was starting to work on a film that I was making, and he came to New York City, and I, interviewed him. I think I went with him to the airport to film him getting out of the taxi or something and going into the airport. It was wonderful to meet him then. And yeah, he was always very supportive of the work that I was doing in New York City with the New York City Coalition for Accountability Now, the ballot initiatives. And he was very welcoming when I started volunteering, and then eventually started working full time at AE. So always grateful to Richard, and I hope that, I think that he will continue to be a friend of mine and of the organization for a long time.
That's right. And there's so many people too who have come and gone over the years. This organization was built by not just staff members, not just people who are here now, but people who were volunteers, lent their time and efforts. And you know how it is, life gets busy, right? So you do a little bit of work for a little bit of time, then you leave, somebody else comes in and fills your place. But the mission of AE911Truth and all of the great evidence and work that we have done over the years continues to move forward. And you haven't seen anything yet because we're really gearing up. I've been talking to Roland, and he has some plans for Project Due Diligence to expand more presentations out to the engineering societies and such. And just keep an eye out for it, because, again, you haven't heard anything yet. Now, we're talking about also looking at new evidence, very important things that people have not picked on before. I'm actually working on something myself, but I like to play things pretty close to the vest. So I'll just say more on that later. I don't like to signal to the bad guys out there what I'm doing. But on everything else, Ted, why don't you take it away? Talk a little bit about some of the things that we're looking at.
Sure. Well, I think I think one of the in terms of our kind of evaluation and strategic planning that's taken place since the 20th anniversary, we've decided that one area that we need to continue and maybe put more focus on in the coming year, more than we did in the past year or so, is developing new evidence. I think there's, as you said, Andy, the evidence was there 10 years ago. The evidence has been added to since then, but I think that there's always there's always more to discover, and there's always the chance that something that you discover could really be more of a breakthrough and more compelling than not all the other evidence, but really add to in a substantial way and become a part of the canon, and that can attract new people. Just the act of discovering that new evidence and publicizing it can spill over and reach more people than are currently listening and hearing all of this stuff. So one perfect example is like the sort of preliminary analysis that Brian Thompson, a fire protection engineer from the Seattle area, did, that he wrote about in an article that we recently published on our website. It was published in mid-December. I'm not going to get the title exactly right, but if you go back to our news section, he talks about a presentation that he gave to other members of his local chapter of the Society of Fire Protection Engineers, and but some stuff that he discovered about the collapse of the South Tower as he was getting ready, as he was preparing his presentation, and he realized that there wasn't a lot of stuff out there about the South Tower. People have the analysis, the video of the towers has really focused mainly on the North Tower, because there's one view in particular where it's very stationary, and you can really measure the descent of the North Tower, the top of the North Tower, very well. With the South Tower, there's not as much analysis on. There's not as much video of the South Tower. There's a lot, but there's not as much, and it's not as set up because it came down first, and so people weren't expecting it. That's one thing that I found as I started really digging into all the videos. If you go to Conspiracy TV and you look at the South Tower videos and you look at the North Tower, there's a lot more of the North Tower because people were kind of expecting it because the South Tower had come down at that point, or more people were, taking video, etc. Anyway, so less analysis has been done of the South Tower. Brian Thompson found some video and made some pretty interesting discoveries that that the top, it looks like the top of the South Tower, essentially there's a kink in it and it sort of starts to break into two as it's coming down, and the top part of it comes down faster than the bottom part. Within the top two sections that form, the upper part falls a little faster than the bottom part. There's really no reason for that thing to break into two, and for the top, and just that, and then for the top to fall faster than the bottom. So there's really some structural damage that's being done inside. This suggests, anyway, being done inside the bottom part of the top of the South Tower. If I didn't lose you, and so he's gonna develop this further, and it looks like he's going to be working with Graham McQueen, who's published a lot, and I've obviously done some work with Graham. He's a wonderful leader and researcher in the 9/11 Truth movement, and it looks like he's going to be working with Brian on refining that analysis and publishing it, and maybe we'll get it peer reviewed. So that's just one example, but I think if you can prove that the top of the South Tower broke into two, like without anything caught, like because it should just fall as a block. If there was a set of explosions that broke into, it's really important evidence. I've got a list over here that I'm looking at. We've been really wanting to investigate seriously the possibility that the fires in Building 7 were intentionally set. So that's something that we started working on last year that we hope to, move further on and complete soon. I also plan to do, as I mentioned before, do a lot more writing about the request for correction and what was actually discovered in the analysis that went into the request for correction. There's some important discoveries that were made as we were putting it together, and then there was a lot of things that were revealed, because of NIST's responses to the request. This is one of the great things about the request for correction, is that it forces NIST to say something, and the stuff that they said was quite revealing. And then also Cyril Wecht, if you watch the film The Unspeakable, or we published an article a couple of weeks ago about Wecht's participation in the film. As I mentioned before, a renowned forensic pathologist who was interviewed for The Unspeakable. We have sort of a budding relationship with him, and we're really trying to have him go where no other forensic pathologists have gone, which is to really take a deep, careful, meticulous look at all of the evidence, all the information related to the human remains, and the extreme fragmentation and commingling of remains at the World Trade Center. This is sort of this open thing that people in the New York area, people that really have followed any sort of coverage of 9/11 are aware of, that these bodies were just completely pulverized, and that 1,100 victims still have not been identified. And I think those, all the people in the world who understand that the buildings were brought down by controlled demolition say, well, there you go. That makes perfect sense. That's more evidence, but we haven't had a forensic pathologist really dig into that and do the analysis, whatever analysis can be done, and render that conclusion that indeed what happened to those bodies is evidence of controlled demolition. I think Cyril Wecht went there in a preliminary way in the film, and we hope that he'll go much deeper in the coming year. So those are just a few of the things. But if folks out there, if you have ideas, please contact us. Or if you have an idea that you want to suggest to us, or if you have something that you've been working on and you want help, let us know. If there's something that you've seen in the videos or some other angle that that hasn't been thought of yet, it can make a big difference. So
That's right. And we always want to hear from our supporters. We're not omnipresent. We don't have every angle, and we don't always know everything that's going on out there. So please, if you have ideas, if you have something that that you think we're missing in terms of the research, then send it to us. You can go to AE911Truth.org and submit it right in the Contact Us forms. So Ted, we've got about 5 minutes left to get to the hour and a half mark, and not every show is going to go this long, folks. We're just getting our feet wet here tonight. But I ask this question a lot because I think it's something to address, and you've got a very good point on this. I've heard you make before, but people say 20 years later, oh, that's too long. You're not going to get justice on this issue after 2 decades pass. I don't believe that. But I want to hear why you don't believe that. And also, tell our audience how they can help us carry on this important work.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, my take is that, well, I mean, a few years ago, I started, this is just one example, but I think it, for me, illustrates how I feel about the bigger question. You know, the Bloody Sunday, which I assume most people are aware of, but just in case they're not, like, I think it was 1972, the British, paratroopers opened up fire on people in Derry, Northern Ireland, who were protesting, Catholics who were protesting, and, ended up killing, I want to say something like 17 people approximately. I'm sorry that I don't know the details. But immediately the British government held an investigation and determined that, sort of like our 9/11 commission, they held this, or like let's use that comparison, determined that, these people who were killed, they were all IRA armed terrorists, and, that the British military was acting in self-defense, essentially, and that was sort of the official story that a lot of people believed for a long time. And meanwhile, the families of the victims in Derry knew that their loved ones were not armed terrorists and not members of the IRA, and but like kind of didn't do a lot, just kind of took it. I mean, it was a dangerous, scary time in Northern Ireland at that time, and but around 20 years after the event, around 1992, after the 20-year mark, the families started organizing, and they were none of them were like professional activists or whatever, but they just started organizing. And some people had more time and more passion than others, and in a matter of like 6 years or so, managed to make huge strides and basically push for a new inquiry to be held into this massacre. And their goal was to prove that their loved ones, they knew who did it, but their goal was to prove that their loved ones were not terrorists, and that the killing that happened was basically in cold blood, and unprovoked. And so I think it was like 98 that the investigation happened, was granted, and then it took another like 12 years. Like the commission actually took that long investigating it, and 20 and excuse me if I'm a little bit off in the details, but around 2010, it concluded and found that they were all unarmed, not terrorists, et cetera, and the actions of the British military were unjustified. They use the term unjustified and unjustifiable. Some of those families are still pushing for criminal prosecutions of the British soldiers who did the killings, and now we're talking about 30, 40, 50 years later, and those families are still fighting. But again, that key detail that they did not begin organizing until 20 years after. And obviously the 9/11 families are by and large have been a fairly organized group. I mean, not that it's monolithic by any means at all, as we know, but I think that there's going to be new organizing to come, maybe a lot of it driven by younger 9/11 family members, but also not necessarily older family members as well. And I think that in a lot of cases, these things take time. Sadly, a lot of people obviously compare 9/11 to JFK. Obviously, the comparison makes sense in many ways. I'm confident that this will not end up like another JFK, or at least I'm hopeful and optimistic. I see it more like a Bloody Sunday situation in large part because I think that, with JFK, we're talking about one person. Obviously, he was the president, but is one person, one family. And in the case of 9/11, we're talking about thousands of victims who were killed that day, and tens of thousands of other victims, whether they're first responders or just New Yorkers who were traumatized or who lost a friend. Not a family member, but a friend. So we're talking about tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of victims who I think once they start to sniff the truth, will push. And because families, which we've seen with the Bloody Sunday families and with many other incidents throughout history, families don't give up. So that they don't give up when they're trying to. Not some do, but a lot don't. So I think on that level, I have a lot of hope, and that's why I personally invest so much energy in working with, people like the Campbells, Matt Campbell and his family, the McIlvains and others, because I believe in them, and I believe in helping them get truth and justice. And I think that I've got a lot of hope, and I think that we are not far off from a major turning point when a lot more families and others around the world will start to organize, and we can all be proud of sort of how far we brought the 9/11 Truth movement before this turning point happened. So,
right, 20 years later is not too long, and if 9/11 ever broke the truth about 9/11, are you telling me they wouldn't have an impact? My God, there's people who still remember that to this day. There's people who are sick, still dying as a result of September 11th. For them, 9/11 happens a little bit every single day. It would absolutely have an impact, and it's never too late for justice. Never too late to do the right thing. So the one question you didn't answer for me, Ted, was how can our supporters help out?
Good question. I think please share the Unspeakable. It's a beautiful film, and I guarantee that whoever you share it with will, they might watch other films about 9/11 Truth and not budge, but I think the Unspeakable can open up, can unlock people's minds and hearts. Of course, the evidence, like as we said before, if you have ideas about anything that we can do, like whether it's new evidence that we can look into, or that you want help looking into, or anything, like we put a lot of resources into responding to people who contact the organization. We respond to people really promptly. Andy, you're a big part of that apparatus, so thank you. So please just feel free to contact us. We are open all the time, responding to people. And the more conversations that we have, the better job we can do, and the more that we can help you make a difference as well. Of course, always donations are critical. So we're actually in the middle of a year-end campaign right now that's going to end December 31st, of course. So please make a donation if you haven't already, if you want to support this incredible team of people and keep the fight alive until this breakthrough happens. And get out there and just don't be afraid to talk to people. Don't be afraid to share. Have the video of Building 7 ready to go on your phone. Know where you can go quickly to show it to people. That always wakes people up. So don't be afraid to talk. That's what I would say.
Absolutely. And I can remember when I was first waking up, talking to another guy about this. One of our outreach tools was to simply have loud conversations on the subway. Yes, not be obnoxious about it, but make sure people can hear about what we're talking about. That is a great way to do it. It's an indirect way to do it. But believe me, the information does sink in. Ted, you're doing amazing work here. So many people are doing amazing work right here. And thank you so much for your time, for this hour and a half, and for coming on 9/11 Freefall today.
Thank you, Andy. You're doing amazing work as well. It's an honor to work with you. And
thank you.
Just keep it up.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, so this is my first venture into the world of video podcasting. I hope it went well enough, but it is, again, work in progress. So we're going to fix the lighting situation maybe. I don't know if I like this. I feel like I'm in Castle Dracula here. And, if there's anything that we can do better with this podcast, if you can tell me what you think or tell me what you like about it too, that's also very encouraging. You can contact us at AE911Truth.org in the contact us box. You can go to 911freefall.com. Contact me there too. But I want to hear what you think about this format. So with that said, have a great night, folks.
This program is on every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific, and every other Sunday night on BBS Radio at 8 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Pacific. You can also keep track of the archives by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying, great week, good luck.